Even the City of Angels has its ghosts. And Los Angeles in the 1970s left a generation of police haunted by one of the worst, the so-called West Side Rapist, whose horrors were a daily staple of the local papers back then. He terrorized this town by raping and murdering elderly women by the dozens.
He was a pretty vicious guy, frightened a lot of people and killed a lot of people.
George Beck was the LAPD's deputy chief in charge of the West Side Rapist case all those years ago.
There was a lot of anxiety on the part of older women, and of course you feel the heat from that.
What was his MO?
He attacked older women living alone, and sometimes in outside situations, a parking lot or an alley, and we couldn't catch up with him.
When they talk about the West Side Strangler, this is it. This is the area.
This is the area he focused in where a majority of his crimes occurred.
Today's cops are still on it.
What's this?
This is one of the buildings from 1975, one of our murder victims.
But cold case detectives Rick Jackson and Richard Bankston say they have done what their predecessors couldn't. They finally cracked it. According to police, the West Side Rapist is a 72-year-old insurance adjuster named John Thomas Jr.
We strongly believe that Mr. Thomas is the West Side Rapist.
What do you think now that you've got this guy and you believe he's responsible for how many?
The numbers can be astronomical. If we are able to put together the cases that we think he's involved in, we could be in the 20s to 30s for murders.
If you can link him to that many, 20s, even 30, has there ever been anyone in LA?
If we're able to link him to the cases we think he's involved in, that would make him LA's most prolific killer.
They found him almost by accident. Cold case detectives were gathering DNA samples on old offenders while looking for another killer, the so-called Grim Sleeper from the 1980s. We were allowed inside the LAPD's crime lab only if we wore masks to keep our own DNA from contaminating evidence.
What did you have to work with on this case?
I had one coroner vaginal slide to work with, and that was created back in 1972.
Criminalist Nick Sanchez says Thomas popped up as a hit, but not for the Grim Sleeper.
I mentioned something about, oh, hey, yeah, I just got a 1972 CODIS hit, and Detective Bankston said, I think that's my case.
It was the case of Ethel Sokoloff, raped and murdered in 1972.
This wasn't a first-time offender. You can tell just from
The complexity of the crime.
Right.
What's complex about it?
Well, you're taking the liberty of going in a house, most likely knowing that somebody is already in there, probably knowing that it's an elderly female already that lives by herself, because what we saw after this case was a pattern of elderly females who all lived alone being attacked.
It's kind of a sacred victim. It's someone's mother, someone's grandmother.
It's grandma, essentially.
Yeah.
It's grandma.
Police say they now have DNA matches on at least 4 old West Side Rapist cases. And as they study the map of elderly women who were raped and strangled in this tight cluster of Los Angeles, they believe Thomas will prove a match for many more.
They brought him down here, and he was very willing to talk to us, and we spent about 4 hours with him, but we can't get into the details of the interview. Very pleasant talking with him.
He's a pleasant guy to talk to?
Very pleasant. Yeah.
The guy who you think might be the worst serial killer in LA history?
He was very cooperative with us, answered our questions to some degree.
Not what you expected.
So
Not what we expected.
Not what anyone expected.
What was always interesting about John was friendly, very affable, very outgoing, always had a smile on his face. So much so that this was the kind of person that you wanted to talk to.
Earl O'Farry Hutchinson worked with Thomas at the State Compensation Insurance Fund, where the accused killer was an insurance claims adjuster. Hutchinson says only 2 things stood out about him: the occasional email preaching Bible scripture and Thomas's remarkably good health.
I'd say, John, you have to tell me, what is your secret? I'd like to package that, and you can sell that to me. I'll buy it. Because I got to tell you, you don't look like your age. Each smile, just good living and living right and thinking right.
Thomas was married 5 times. He served briefly in the Air Force in the 1950s, worked as a social worker and as an electronics salesman in the 70s, and was twice arrested for sexual assault.
I've seen it again and again that people that engage in these monstrous acts are thought of as good neighbors.
Deputy Chief Charlie Beck is overseeing the case.
Who is this guy? I mean, these are some terrible crimes. Terrible.
I don't know who he is. I know he's a monster. We talk about predators all the time. You always hear cops talking about predators. Well, that's what exactly. This is an apex predator targeting the weak with absolutely no remorse, no feeling, no compassion.
Chief Beck knows this case better than most. It was another Chief Beck who worked it from the very same post more than 30 years earlier. His father.
It's quite a coincidence, isn't it? It kind of blows your mind, as the kids say nowadays. There's a satisfaction there. I'm very happy for him that it's happened the way it has. And I know there are a lot of people that this is going to be important to, the families of the victims.
To me, this is, we're just bit players in this drama. I think it kind of emphasizes a couple of things. One is the inhumanity of these crimes, but then the humanity of Los Angeles and the way that one generation watches the next, and the way that the living, find justice for the dead. I mean, it's a story about humanity.
Cold case homicide. Detective Amler can help you.
Today, the LAPD's cold case squad is fielding calls from across the country, the grandchildren of elderly women killed in the 70s, looking for justice.
It's tough to even hear this kind of call. These stories are horrible.
The people they're not even looking to, have their case brought to the court. They're just looking for answers to solve their case so they don't have to keep wondering who did this.
For
They just want
decades, they've
one
been
answer.
wondering.
Just give me the answer that it's him, and I'll be okay.
The LAPD has 9,000 cold cases, but they live by the motto that no case is too old or too cold. DNA is breathing new life to these old murders. And 2 generations of cops know that even after all these years, there is still a lot of work left to do. I'm Neil Karlinski for Nightline in Los Angeles.